Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI, Government in the Future. I'm your host, Mark Lay, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Willem Koenders to the show. Willem is a global leader in data strategy and governance, currently spearheading innovative efforts with ZS Associates. He has over 12 years of experience, including key roles at Deloitte. Willem has become a prominent voice in shaping how organizations leverage data responsibly. His expertise spans developing strategies for data governance by design, addressing challenges like synthetic data generation, and ensuring AI applications align with privacy, security, and ethical standards. Today, we'll explore the pressing issues surrounding ethics and accountability in AI. Willem will share his insights on the intersection of data strategy, AI governance, and collaborative frameworks that balance innovation with societal responsibility. Welcome to the show, Willem. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Mark. It's fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we typically like to get a little bit into each of our guests' background and motivation for pursuing a career in artificial intelligence and related technologies. So, Willem, I'll ask the same question to you. I guess, could you describe a little bit of your personal background and what initially inspired you to focus on the intersection of data governance and AI?
Absolutely, Mark. So right now, you're right. Like I am actually very passionate about that exact intersection, like where you think about maybe these things that aren't necessarily that sexy, right? They're a little bit boring sometimes even, or seen as a cost, but like how can you actually leverage them for companies to sustain a competitive advantage? But I would have to say, when you say like, when did I decide to focus on this, is like what was true for me is what is true for the vast majority of folks I believe in this area, is that like I rolled into it. I stumbled into it. Like I actually wrote something about this a few weeks ago because I myself am helping a lot of organizations, including my own team, to grow and find talent. And what we find is that for this intersection, like there's no master degree out there, not really, right? For computer science, there is. For AI sciences, there is. For like engineering, but like specifically this bit around governance, it's really folks who kind of fall into it. And so that's what happened to me. The first couple of years in my career, I worked for some of the world's largest financial organizations to help them build their data governance models. And so spent a couple of years there, experienced firsthand like how rough it can be to kind of try to build up those programs, to get a bad rep, like hard to get the business cases together. But then I specifically the last couple of years more, also seeing that same companies are massively struggling to enable and activate AI and analytics. And if you really analyze it well, then you see that, these kind of offensive AI analytics objectives, as well as like the more defensive ones related to governance and privacy, share a lot of foundational capabilities that will really help you do both. And I think that's become a passion of mine, to try to tell that story and try to help companies tell that story.
Great. Well, I think that's very interesting. You touched on something around finding talent. I guess, Willem, we don't normally get into this on the show, but I guess from your perspective, what are some of the key skills or qualities that would enable someone to work effectively in data governance, or credibly assess how organizations are positioned to leverage AI, or what some best practices are? Are there any skills or kind of attributes from your personal experience that you think would enable others to be successful?
Love the question, because I've been giving this some thought myself, that while I'm trying to figure this out again myself, as well as various companies we're working with, because literally every single one we're working with has open vacancies in this space, every single one. So if anybody out there is looking for something else to do, that's maybe one thing to mention. But like across kind of these like longer 10, 12, 15 bullets that you usually see, like for me personally, I look at three things and three things alone, really. And if you score enough in these three things, I'd either hire you myself directly, or I'd recommend you to other organizations. And these three things being, one is you do need to have sufficient understanding of some of the technical concepts involved. So like you need to know what metadata is, why data quality is important, for example, what are some of the data privacy principles. You can't start entirely from zero. Like you don't have to be an expert in all of them, but you need to know enough to be able to have a conversation on them. But then the second one is like, are you able to contextualize this? Like if you start your discussion with, let's say, a business division or a product division, and you cannot just take your textbook understanding and push that out, it won't work. Right? You have to kind of interpret like the situation, the business process, and try to customize your understanding. And then the third part is a rolled up sleeve mentality. Like even with these first two, things I just mentioned, you can't just drop off from the call at the end of it. You have to get in there and show how it works. You have to be part of it. Again, like roll up sleeves, create some of those rules, like talk through the processes and get kind of your hands dirty. Like if if you have just these three things, it sounds very simple, but turns out it's actually not that easy to find folks who score really nicely in these three dimensions. But anyway, you asked.
That's really helpful. I think there's a lot of analogs in any sort of consulting or advisory capacity where you have your functional expertise and then the domain knowledge to be able to apply your technical expertise to real business or operational challenges. So I think that's a great way to frame kind of the prototypical candidate or skills that would enable someone to be successful in this field. Another side question around, maybe some of the current work that you and your team are focusing on. You mentioned that you've observed some common challenges or struggles or maybe even opportunities that organizations face, either in terms of developing or implementing governance policies or leveraging AI capabilities for increased competitiveness or efficiency. I guess, anecdotally, what are some of those challenges that you've seen that affect multiple organizations that you've worked with?
Oh yeah, the most important one is the fact that generative AI is just the latest kid on the block here, the latest the trend and what everybody and a lot of business teams want to get involved with. But like before with other predictive algorithms when they came out, and even big data in a broader sense, like turns out that data still matters, right? And so I think that is by far the biggest challenge that we're seeing and that we're helping companies with is kind of making sure that foundational capability is there. That is to say, like, what's the most critical data that we have in a company? Like, how is it classified? Where is it stored? Is it managed like an asset? Does it have an owner? Do I have some sense on its reliability or how I can trust it? Like even, or especially generative AI or any sort of predictive, even the more complicated ones become relatively straightforward if you have all the data at your fingertips, right? It's really, that is when we've done surveys in some of these global organizations, like interviewing their analytics teams. And then we find that they spend 60, 70, 80% of their time wrangling data. Like, where is it? They need to interpret it. They need to map it. They need to consolidate it or parse it. That's the vast majority of where the struggle is. And so whenever the data is there, like, I wouldn't say a piece of cake, but it becomes a lot. It becomes actually a lot easier and frankly, a lot more fun too.
And I think understanding the data that an organization has at its disposal and how it informs or sheds light on business problems or opportunities that, could be assisted or brought clarity through predictive analytics or Gen AI or any sort of analytical process is a good first step. As someone who has developed or, provided recommendations on data governance principles or developing data governance by design, would love to hear your perspective, Willem, on, are there any sort of key elements or best practices for, effectively understanding the data that your organization has at its disposal or wrangling that data in an effective way? I guess from your perspective, what are some of the key elements of an effective data governance framework?
Yeah, I think, it's specifically if you would apply it to a context of you have an analytical use case and you're trying to use that, like there's a couple of things that would come to mind. And first and foremost, perhaps, is separating the data from kind of the analytical use afterwards, right? So like many times, like the data is grabbed, it's ingested already, and like within the analytical tool, we're starting to wrangle already. Like we're starting to do things to it, and like we've actually kind of, we can't rely on this data that comes from somewhere else. Like this could happen anywhere in any sort of context, but like ideally you have some upstream data that you can rely on. Like where it is, you can connect to it. It's certified in a sense. It also has an owner, right? So that you can talk to someone to like, hey, what I'm trying to do, is that actually appropriate? Or and even if so, is this the right spot to take it from? Like I think that by far is the biggest biggest capability, the biggest enabling part of the framework that should be in place, where it is perhaps surprisingly, it's mostly not about technology at all. Like there's very often, storage is there, the compatibility to connect to it is there. It's really more about like this governance component, right? Around ownership, stewardship, and that process layer that's around it. That's the biggest challenge that comes up time and time again, even though again, like, I mean, some Gen AI is new, but these questions are not new at all. Like they're decades old, like multiple decades old that we've looked at them, and we're sometimes still struggling with them. So I think that is part of it, and then you get an interesting kind of extra layer where sometimes where does data start and stop, and where does AI start and stop, right? But in terms of like the explainability and transparency of the models themselves, like how do you take certain data, what actually happens, and being able to explain that is, I guess, a more common component of this framework. But yeah, I think those are some of the key things that would come to mind for me. But just coming back to these big concepts like stewardship, ownership, having data domains defined in your company, right? So that you're not trying to manage all data everywhere in your company, but you try to figure out like what are those 3 or 4 thematic logical groupings of data that are most impactful for my models, right? Who are here the owners who can help me understand how to interpret it, and also make sure that it's clean, right? I can reuse it today, but also next year when your models may be in production.
Yeah, and you've championed kind of the concept of data governance by design. I guess, Willem, do some of those best practices underpin that term, and maybe in the way in which you've engaged developing data governance policies for other organizations?
Absolutely, and I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Like when something bad happens, right? Or there's some data breach, or there's a regulatory party is coming in and doing an audit, and then there's a lot of like an enormous amount of effort is spent in these organizations to do this backward looking basic remediation work. Like, where is my data actually? Where did we take this data from? Like, who actually said that was a great idea? And sometimes it's even like, in a sense, folks from organizations like my own who were there temporarily to help build the solutions. Like that's the point. Like they come there, there's a short window where all this super rich understanding is there. Like why this data? Like why is it taken from this spot? Like why is that the right data that goes into this type of model? But then these people go. Even people, like, they move on. And if you haven't at that point made sure that you built in these controls by design, like that are sustainable and that have an owner as well, then you're going to find yourself in sometime later where you're going to have to spend that much bigger investment to like backward looking try to figure it out. And well, I can tell you, I'm not looking back with, well, I don't know, meeting people and like getting to a solution was great, but like those years digging through ETL script, try to figure out lineage and all of that, like who wants that? Like nobody. And I think that's where the whole, like if you data governance by design, like it just, I have this other anecdote where like I literally was in a meeting, on a certain Monday with a business leader who was complaining about basically exactly this experience. Oh my goodness, why do we do this? It takes forever. And then Tuesday, the next day, like in a brand new implementation of a new process, we're just saying, look, if you want to prevent this from happening, here's some very tweaks that you should put in place that are going to cost a little bit extra now, but then you manage it by design. And he said, no, I think about my business goals and I want to move ahead. So let's think about that later, right? Like how do you drive that awareness, that kind of buy-in that you can do that by design is something I'm very passionate about. Because maybe one last comment here is you if you do it right, you won't have these disasters happen. And so then it is sometimes hard to kind of explain the added value again. You have to continuously put effort in explaining like why these by design controls have prevented you from getting into a certain mess that people might now not know about because it didn't happen, right? So like that's that complexity that you just have to continue to hammer on.
Yeah, well, I wonder, are there consistent kind of KPIs or performance metrics that you can measure in terms of like hours saved or hours wasted remediating a problem, or money saved, money wasted remediating a problem, that could be broadly applicable to any organization looking to implement or expand a AI supported business process? Have you seen any sort of like effective methods of communicating the importance or value of data governance by design in your experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so like there's metrics like I mean it depends enormously on the context, the business processes, the region even, but there's a whole range of metrics that you can pick from, like which ones are the most impactful given the the particular use case that we're looking at. Like if you're in a regulated sector, like you have ways of taking fines that are happening. There are organizations that are kind of building databases around the fines that are assigned for privacy reasons, for example, to different companies. And you can take those and you can show, look, like companies very similar like ours have gotten these, we have not, right? And so you can take a percentage of that you can attribute to the controls you put in place. That's one way, but another one that we just operationalized in a given organization is basically we'd built these analytical personas for this company. Like there were hundreds of folks like data scientists or business analysts, data analysts, different shades of folks who are trying to get data, build reports, build these models. And we profiled them like into a couple of big segments, and we had measured. A lot of it was self-reported, but nonetheless, like measured like how much time are you spending doing this? How much time are you spending doing that? Like how happy are you with something? And so what we had established is like that's good to know now to try to help you inform the actions you're taking to improve that. Like don't stop there. Like make these metrics. This is now a baseline, a pulse check, but make sure you get the next pulse too, right? So repeat it in 6 or 12 months, and then you can kind of see like, am I seeing this trend change? Because in a lot of the customers that we work with, at the end of the day, perception is reality even, right? So if the business says it's good, it's good. If they're saying it's not, it's not. At the end of the day, they're the masters of the P&L, right? And so like that's also how you make sure that you buy them into that process, not just when there's a problem, but also to enable their experience.
Yeah. And I think this is something that I've experienced working on developing metrics that align with the performance or output of federal programs or private businesses. Measure what you have available to you that's feasible to obtain, reliable, and kind of trackable over time. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I think, Willem, what you're saying, start collecting information, analyzing it in ways that correlate with, organizational success, risk, or failure, and kind of refine those metrics over time as you have additional, intervals of collecting data against those metrics as well. So I think that's helpful. Just kind of use the data available to you to the best of your ability to report on organizational progress, even if it isn't perfect or if the data is a little bit messy. I guess in terms of, we do explore kind of the intersection of, government operations, artificial intelligence technologies, policy, governance. I guess, Willem, in terms of, effective government, use cases for generative AI or other analytical applications, have you seen any sort of emerging applications or ways in which public sector organizations are leveraging AI tools or AI processes that are really exciting to you or represent, significant potential, anything like that?
So there's one interesting one that I was reading about not too long ago, because I'm like very interested between kind of this connection again between data management, data governance in a way, and this kind of AI enablement. And as I said initially, you kind of have to separate them a little bit, right? Like, you would love for your analyst and your data scientists, you would love for them to be able to just use the data as an input, not to have to solve for it. Like that should be somebody else's problem. Yeah, I mean, you need to like give input, like why do you need it, and what are the requirements you have. But like how can you kind of use that? Except for this like really interesting situation where actually Gen AI technology is applied to data management. Like I love that particular area a lot. And so like that, I don't know. I mean, in the federal public sector, the example that I was reading about, for example, is assessing the policies that companies have in place. Like that's actually something that Gen AI can do. Like you can have it read the policies and figure out, does it check all the boxes that GDPR or CCPA, or for example, is asking for? Like that's actually a fairly straightforward analytical thing to do. Like you can do that at scale, very quickly, very consistently. That was like something is like that's something that makes me happy and laugh almost. Like that's like a great application. And then I mean, there's also like maybe adjacent, a little bit more complicated, like especially in like metadata management, how something again like generative AI, or in any case language models, can help you accelerate that enormously, right? Where in the past, again, I spent several years managing teams doing that. Like people who go in cell by cell, writing up the definition. Like please don't do that anymore. Like there's no reason to do that. Like you can even derive it even if you don't have anything to go off of. It can actually generate definitions pretty decently based on the data itself. I could just infer what it's about. So in any case, those are some of those applications where usually they're somewhat separate, like one depends on the other, but where you kind of turn it around for a second, it's like, no, not how's data enabling Gen AI or AI, like how's AI enabling data? Like that's really I love that space, and trying to push the solutions in this space, both ourselves and with our customers.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a really good way of putting it, almost using some of these Gen AI tools to, label, describe, wrangle, data that the organization is managing, or better understand the data, as well as maybe doing some sort of a compliance check to determine, hey, do these policies kind of cover all of your bases? I think that's a great application for some of these emerging tools. I think it's also suitable for public sector organizations to consider because, 10 years ago, you've got, data.gov producing a lot of these really clean, structured, long time series data sets that, people could use for any sort of Kaggle competition, or developing kind of, open source tools, looking at historical federally curated data. And I think that's a theme that comes up on this show, is that, a lot of these federal agencies have a really strong, kind of credible, sets of data that, could be published for and almost accessed like a public utility, to inform kind of private sector independent development of tools that are based on quality, sound information, and maybe using some generative AI capabilities to, assess or organize data that might be a little bit disparate in your own internal organization could be a good application. I guess, Willem, any thoughts on, federal agencies?
There's one example that I can't become too specific, but let's say kind of in the area in the Middle East area, like where we were invited to have conversations with a government who was trying to do pretty much exactly what you were saying. They were considering revamping kind of a digital ministry of sorts, like try to help the data across their 15 plus other ministries, like how like data, for example, that was gathered in the realm of criminal statistics, for example, could be shared with and they kind of cross-reference with, for example, like healthcare statistics and things like that, as well as just there's the population metrics themselves. Like that's where he's had conversations about like how could you apply principles that are established, actually same as before. Like you want to have data as an asset, right? So you look at a certain logical grouping of data, you're able to define it, you're able to give it an owner, you're able to define what are, let's say, appropriate use cases for this type of data, which was actually the most important thing in this particular example. Like, because some of those use cases, like some, I don't know if we get to talk about this a little bit, but like in different parts of the world, like these use cases may or may not be frowned upon, right? So like they may be completely make sense in that particular area, and they may be highly controversial in others. But in any case, like treating these data like a public asset, and you're right, like even like in different classifications, like one is like actually public, like put it out there for our scientists to know. There was some example of geological, I believe, data sets that they wanted to have out there so that everybody could, just use them for really whatever use case they had. And then also just internally between the ministries, like what are kind of these data bits that we shouldn't lock up, but you actually should expose them to the other ones, because it could really inform that broader 360 view of your society, or the individuals within it, right? The families within it. So yeah, seen some examples for sure.
Yeah. And I guess just touching on your international experience, I know you've worked kind of extensively in Latin America, and, there's a lot of international activity with the EU AI Act and other policies that are emerging across the world. I guess, are there specific challenges, Willem, that you've seen that arise when balancing maybe cultural norms or culturally or regionally specific requirements with the need for unified global standards as it pertains to AI? Or I guess, are there any sort of regional or international considerations that you think are top of mind for us to consider?
Absolutely. And so first of all, I would say that the good news is that we're at least for the most part starting to speak the same language, right? We're using the same term. It actually English too. It just actually seems to permeate the discussions. But in any case, like where GDPR is one of the biggest examples, right? Europe was by far the first one who were comprehensively putting that type of legislation out there with actual teeth to it. And so when we were in Latin America, we were monitoring all the countries, and it wasn't a matter of are they interested? It was a matter of, when will they implement it? And also like, how will they customize GDPR? Like they would even say that, like, that's our basis. That seems to work, and like, depending on that and depending on their, the legal system, they would take that and customize it. So I guess, so just upfront that part, that we at least speak in the same language, but then within the same context and within that, within these concepts, there is very different values attached to some of these concepts. And so for the one that's maybe surprising to folks in the US and Europe is that privacy is not really appreciated in the same way across the world, right? Look at facial recognition technology in China, for example. But like that, I think that's an example that a lot of people have already familiar with. Like I had an example randomly because I lived in Morocco for 2 years, and we at some random day we bought a parasol, like I think you call it, like against the sun, and and so like we just wanted to pay for it, and they was like, okay, so what's your name? I was like, okay, here's my name. Like, what's your address? Like, why do you need to know this? It's like there's this ingrained like distrust now, in the sense of like, if you're asking for like an email and phone number they all wanted to have, I was like, why on earth do you need this? I'm buying a parasol. I'm not coming back here. And if it's wrong, or if it's defective, I'll find you. You're like, I don't, and I know, and there's no way I could take that product without giving this information, which is just, it is indicative, because it happened many, many times over, of a completely different cultural appreciation, or at least pointing the journey on like that's important and how that kind of is important. And so that's maybe one thing. But like related to that, you can also see the trust of government entities having this data is another one, right? So like, for example, in Denmark and in various countries in Europe, where they have a national patient register, all medical examinations for 40 years have been gathered in all the hospitals, so that, a lot of people can kind of use that data and infer insights off of that. I mean, imagine doing that in the US. I mean, the storm that it would create is completely different. We see Twitter, right? Former Twitter, see this with its identical policies and standards, trying to apply them across the world, seeing that in some countries you get very different challenges than in others, right? So like there's like the language is the same in a way, the concepts are the same. So I think that's the good news. And I think the challenge is just the implementation. But I think that's also okay. It recognizes that cultures are different. Like if there were no challenges and it would be the same everywhere, then maybe cultures wouldn't exist anymore. I mean, that can't be right either. So I think maybe some of that is okay. You just have to deal with it.
Yeah, establishing a common set of terms or ways in which we view kind of the development, use, or testing, assessment of some of these AI tools, having a certain amount of standardization and what are the best practices? What's an effective method for evaluating the quality of the data that your Gen AI model is leveraging to produce conclusions and that sort of thing would help kind of promote transparency and accountability. I think, Willem, another concept that we discuss on this show is, positioning or developing kind of a collaborative method between government programs or government agencies and the private sector, given that, the U.S., or at least here in the U.S., has a strong competitive advantage in terms of a lot of the leading AI, vendors and companies are based here, in the U.S. And, there are obviously like safeguards or standards that would, if designed correctly, could support kind of a, responsible and effective rollout and expansion of these AI-based use cases without being overly constricting to innovation and sacrificing maybe U.S. leadership in this space. So I guess, are there any do you have a point of view or recommendations on, how the public sector and private sector could collaborate effectively to design standards or best practices that are supportive of the current innovation space here in the U.S.?
First and foremost, like both are responsible, right? So in their own way. If you just take the other example of the financial sector in a more broader sense, for example, like by now we all know that you can't just sit back and then criticize things that went wrong if you are a regulatory or authority. You have to step in and be more proactive because we've seen in the past what can happen otherwise. At the same time, like you will not be able to catch everything all the time. Like there is an innate responsibility that sits with the companies themselves, especially when these things are rapidly evolving, right? So if you're taking, let's say the action to develop something, then and like not the regulator can't guess all of these things every step along the way. So you're both fully responsible, and that makes in any sense. I think there's definitely like across the spectrum again, right? One end of the spectrum, you can't do anything, or I'm going to fully regulate it. It doesn't work. You're just going to progress is going to be hampered. And there's also like, oh my God, there's too much societal value to be unlocked from like new medicine, from all these different things. Like you don't want that, right? So like you kind of like in your question, you already mentioned that. But laissez-faire entirely doesn't work either. Like I think a couple of things that should definitely be in there is obviously a framework of sorts, like common terminology and some really clear examples of this is okay, this is not okay. And I think also an articulation of the fact that you have a responsibility that is in a sense commonsensical, right? So it does, like you should invest time in figuring out what is appropriate use of your data. And if even in hindsight later on, like we go back retroactively and go back, then we can't say, well, that, nobody said that you can't put on a virtual reality glasses while you're driving. No, maybe nobody actually said that, but it's really common sense. It's just a really bad idea to do it, right? And so like there is that option for you to go back also and kind of go after people if they really egregiously, let's say go wrong. I think the last thing that I maybe would want to mention here, in addition to things that I believe have been mentioned on your show here in previous episodes as well, like the public-private, partnership and different ways to work together. Like I think also from a public federal perspective is invest in making it easy, making it understandable. Like I spend a lot of time with chief privacy officers who really want to do this. Like they really do want to do it. They just don't know how. Like they don't know where to start. And I think to just be very crisp and clear about, and really invest time in not having very legalistic, long documents in a sense, but like invest time in making this implementable and feasible so that folks that are stepping into a new role in a big company actually within the span of 2 to 3 months could meaningfully drive change. That's maybe the one thing I would mention is the quick conversations where it's almost assumed that every company wants to kind of not stick to the rules and take shortcuts. Like I just don't see that really. Like I do see like business people who are more eager to really get that business use case unlocked, but I see many chief data officers, chief analytical officers, like a chief privacy officer who really want to do this. And then they're just struggling with how. And so like anything that you can give them to like be very specific, actually, for example, being very clear about fines can help too, right? So like the fact that GDPR says, this 4% of global revenues, I don't know if people realize this, enormously helps chief privacy officers to build a business case to actually drive change, right? If you don't do when I'm saying like be a bit simple, and like I'm not meaning like keep it easy for them. Like I'm like you just need to be clear, and like I think that would really help.
Yeah, and I think something we talk about on this show is developing, almost identifying kind of data governance or playbooks or problems to solve that would serve as either knowledge resources or templates for private sector chief privacy officers to leverage when developing their business cases. I think would be helpful, because at that point you're not necessarily prescribing like a performance threshold or a specific standard, but you're recommending kind of an effective method of operations or an approach that people could take on and have a certain degree of confidence that the policies or the data management controls that they're putting in place are going to be effective and kind of reflect the current state of the art. So I think federal programs understanding how their constituents could leverage data sources that they or similar agencies produce or provide, or implement AI based applications or processes that operate kind of within their mission space or their domain area, and then developing resources that make it easier to design these processes and controls that would responsibly leverage tools or data sets would be really helpful. Yeah, just have a productivity and lower barriers to entry kind of mindset, and you should be in good shape.
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't have said it any better. Especially these templates and like very real examples that they can reference and use in their own implementation journeys is something that's very helpful. Yep.
And I guess one last kind of topic that I wanted to cover in terms of impacts that you're seeing some of these data governance challenges or generative AI or other predictive AI capabilities having on your clients, organization or workforce. Do you see these tools impacting kind of how individuals are spending their time? You'd mentioned earlier in the conversation that analysts are spending upwards of 60%, wrangling and cleaning and understanding data. Do some of these tools shift that distribution of time so that the individuals that you're working with can kind of focus on higher order, more strategic initiatives, or are we still a ways away?
No, exactly that. And so like, I mean, step by step, right? Especially the companies with, 20, 30 years of history and data legacy, it's a journey, right? It takes time, and it's for the same reason, like you want to make sure that you do this in a measured fashion. Like you pick a domain or two or a division or two, and you kind of like, you follow the agile playbook where you test it out, you learn quick, and then you scale. But yeah, absolutely, that is 100% what's happening. Like one of the bigger medical technology companies that we worked for last time, like one of their key, let's say, objectives was that their sales folks should spend more time on the road, right? They were just spending time calling people, try to figure out like what stuff did we sell last week, instead of actually having a strategic conversation. And so it's a bit of a cliche, but truly that data driven behavior is what you really want to enable. And that's actually, there's a lot of steps to be taken here, because like we really focus almost all of our effort and attention on the supply of data often. Like, I mean, so do we, but in terms of like what data do we have the quality, is it cataloged, how do we integrate it and all of that, but we spend almost no time at all in terms of, okay, like assume it's not now there, like how is someone's job changing, like are they, because it's a different skill set too, like how are you going to now behave differently? And so there's this book from Daniel Kahneman, old one, referenced many times over, about thinking slow and fast, that kind of outlines how there's bias in everybody, like how we make decisions and how data influences what data we get at what point, like how it influences the decisions we make. And I think maybe one thing that I just wanted to call out, because I don't hear it as much, is we need to spend time on that as well, right? So like in some of our the last couple of transformational programs, we very deliberately spend a lot of time on that aspect of change management. It's like not just the systems of data and can you build the model, but like think a couple steps further. You're actually going to use this data now. Your job description is different, right? If somebody who was a sales person for 25 years, like who now all of a sudden has a Tableau dashboard that recommends a particular set of products, is very, very different than from somebody doing this on intuition, right? And so like that's a part of when you talk about skills, and we can talk about all the other skills as well, right? In terms of data scientists and data engineering, platform capabilities, all these things. But like I thought this was an interesting one to maybe highlight because it kind of not that often gets emphasized.
Yeah, understanding how the data, when it's present, when it's high confidence, reliable, traceable, whatever, how the data is going to be used is incentivizing the correct behavior that is going to increase output or overall corporate competitiveness. I think those are really important questions, Willem, that don't necessarily get the attention that they deserve. But yeah, just understanding, hey, this is how the data or the results of some analytical process are going to be used to impact the way and improve the way that we do business, either in the private sector or as a federal public sector program, is a really strategic conversation that can help kind of demystify some of these more technical concepts as well, and in terms that everyone can understand.
Yeah, maybe one last kind of comment in related to this is because it like a lot of the private sector is naturally having to show an ROI all the time, right? Any time you go out of business. But I think it's very encouraging to see how a lot of federal and public organizations are adopting this evidence-based policy making too, right? I spent myself quite some time at the Ministry of Finance back in the day in the Netherlands, for example, as well as there with some healthcare organizations. Like how do you actually do that, and what is really the right data to make sure that you can conclude that some of these investments make sense or these processes work. So I think that's very encouraging to see.
Yeah, I would agree. Great. Well, I guess, Willem, as we close out, given your extensive experience, any other advice that you would offer to policymakers, industry leaders, or technologists looking to align AI innovation with, strong governance and traceable, accountable AI-based decision making?
I think the one thing, and I'm probably going to skip over, let's say, the 7, 8 things that other people would also say. So maybe focus on one or two things that may be a little bit, I don't know, controversial or different. But like one thing is, I would recommend not necessarily to go and create an entirely new playbook for AI alone. Like for a very large extent, like if I think about like what traditional data management discipline already includes is, for example, like what type of data again do we have? How do you define it? And the whole topic around data usage is already governed there, like at least in the theory, like where you have an owner, a steward, you have approval processes of what is the right way to use certain data, what is ethical behavior in a sense. And for me personally, like I see the excitement around AI, but for me, it doesn't necessarily change any of these foundational things that we kind of had already understood to some extent, right? So if you take the example around, was it hiring algorithms? So you want to make sure there's no, let's say, bias between, because of you're training your data set on folks who maybe, particularly representing one ethnicity and not another. Like you might just be trying to find people who resemble that, right? But like would we accept that behavior if a person would do it? No, neither, right? And so like that's already covered. Like a person in that role can't either cherry pick the data points to like find, like you would give the same type, you would want to have the same type of governance or if the process was fully manual. And so just going back to the point is, don't go out there and reinvent this very new complicated AI specific framework, but really take a look as well at these foundational data capabilities and foundations, because those really make you able to both activate and govern the AI applications as well.
Yeah, Willem, that's a good point. Understanding how your organization or your customers or constituents use your data, whether it's for internal decision making or you're providing insights or outputs to customers or the public for their benefit, having a logic model or a clear organizational wide understanding of how the data is used and supports organizational success, it allows you to identify specific, almost like bottlenecks in the process to automate or improve through tools like generative AI or content synthetic data generation or something. And so it doesn't need to be too in the weeds, and it should be grounded in a business case, as you've said. So I would agree.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, if you take a given, like you get very complicated situations if you have a given use case that's just in a journey, right? It just does not use automation AI now. So right now it would be covered by a data governance framework. And then next year, now we're going to like implement AI. Now it's going to be covered by a different framework. I mean, no, not really. It's just kind of a higher maturity of how you're executing your respective business case. Where like one example that we've seen in different companies is where they've asked us like, so we just have a new data council or data governance council. Like, is that enough, or should I have a separate governance AI governance council, right? And so like that's the type of like how do you manage that, right? So like and all I'm saying, I'm not even saying that you shouldn't have dedicated attention for AI. You should, right? Because the scalability is massive. Is a different way of how data can be transformed and used and democratized. But at the same time, a lot of these foundational things, I would just keep hammering it over and over again. Is like go back to some of these foundational data capabilities and make sure those are in place, and the rest will follow.
I would agree. Well, Willem Koenders, thank you so much for your time today. I guess where can people go to check out more of your work?
LinkedIn, mostly my LinkedIn page. Like everything is linked from there. The Medium articles I write as well. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Willem Koenders, ZS Solutions. I will keep tabs on your work moving forward and appreciate your perspective here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, sir.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.